How we doing, everybody?
Yo, yo, yo.
Hi. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Fine's okay. We'll take it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll give it a minute for others to join, and then we can go ahead and get started. I think we have 2 agenda items today, if I'm not mistaken. We'll go ahead and start that in just a minute. Hope you're all having a great Tuesday so far.
Pretty good Tuesday, I would say.
I'm not hearing a standout, but you know.
It just
Okay, Tuesday.
Yeah, there's still time for it to become the best Tuesday. Well, let's put it that way, I guess.
there's still potential.
There's still potential.
Not over till it's over.
It's not over till it's over.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and get started, folks? Welcome everybody to the July 12th, 2022 SIG Multicluster. Zach, I think you have something on the agenda around KubeFed. Why don't you go ahead and I'll go ahead and enable screen sharing because I'm pretty sure somebody on the agenda may have a deck.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so shall I talk now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, nice to meet you all. And I'm Zach from Ant Group, a hybrid cloud product team. And I would like to talk about my agenda. Yeah, that was about KubeFed. Our team is building. First, I would like to have a brief introduction to our team. What are we doing, and what are we doing with KubeFed? Okay, and our team is building cloud-native PaaS to help our customers run and operate their apps on multi-cluster cloud. They currently include public cloud, private cloud, and sooner would be extend to hybrid cloud. And KubeFed is the underlying layer we use for multi-cluster Kubernetes resource management. And we have been using KubeFed for over 2 years, as far as I recall. Yeah, so you know, KubeFed is still somehow active at that time, and we don't have many third-party choices at that time. You know, like now. Now we have many other third-party choices. And now our products are widely used across more than 50 companies around the world in production. So it definitely won't be easy for us to switch to some other solutions. So let alone KubeFed is well suited to our case now. In general, our product will manage several large clusters rather than many small clusters like Edge. We do not use this case. So the push model of KubeFed is decent for us, I think, for now. Yeah. So this is why we would like to help keep the maintenance of KubeFed because we are still actively using it in production, and we would like to use it in the near future. Yeah. And the next I would like to share is some internal enhancements of our team to the KubeFed. Yeah, if you are interested, you can hear that. Yeah. The first one is called placement mask. You know, KubeFed use placement masks to decide which cluster to dispatch resources. And once we update the template, it would be propagated to every cluster in placement. No, yeah. And what if we want a great release? It cannot be done. We have think that removing the placement won't solve this because it will delete the resource rather than keep it untouched. So we introduced a placement mask annotation to federated resources, and we put the cluster we want to propagate in that annotation. This way, KubeFed will only do propagation on clusters in this mask and ignore other clusters in placement. And this enables us to do a great release or canary release to clusters. And the second one is we call annotation propagation management. We know KubeFed cannot propagate annotations for now, because many controllers will manage annotations and we do not to fight with them. But there are cases we do want to propagate some annotations. A very typical case is that when we are using a cloud control manager to reconcile load balancer services. That is very common in cloud. And we need to configure the custom arguments of the load balancer through the annotations of the service. So in this case, we have to propagate some annotations to the service. Yeah, so we introduce a propagating annotation on the federated type config. And this tells kubefed which annotations to propagate and which to return. And we also support wildcards. So we make this configuration very flexible. And this is well fit in our use case. Yeah. And speaking of this feature, recently I've also found many people have need to customize the propagation and retention rules of federated resources, just like the one in the Slack yesterday. You can see, check that. And we have initiated a discussion on this general feature. Yeah, and hopefully it will result to a cap and finally an implementation in the open source kubefed. Yeah, I would like to make this. Yeah. So that's all about my sharing about the kubefed. And finally, I would like to talk about the maintenance of the project. Yeah, I've been watching and contributing to this project for a year, so I think I have some knowledge about the current maintenance state of the kubefed. I've seen 3 core maintenance of kubefed now. Maybe some of you have already know them. They are Hector, Irfan, and Jimmy Dyson, And for now, I can only see Irfan still keep an eye on this project, but just an eye, And Jimmy addressing releases occasionally, addressing releases, but yeah. And Hector seems to be disappeared from the project for some time, and I've been reached out to him, and since he's no longer working at DigitalIQ, and there's no big impetus to keep him working on this project. DigitalIQ is using kubefed, but now Hector is not at DigitalIQ. Yeah. So he just told me help the project as much as I can. So I also tried to reach out to Jimmy, but get no response. So I don't know what's what his condition is. Yeah. So this project is really in nearly archived situation if there's no active maintainer to join in. So that's why I'm here and advocate myself to take the responsibility of the project. And this is not only because our team is using this. Yeah, I've still seen many people around there using the project and want to make it better. And evidence is that there are still new PRs, issues, and Slack talks on this project. So there's actually people around here using this project and keep using it. Yeah. So I think this project still has some vitality, and I would like to keep that. Yeah. So that's all about my introductions and some sharings. And now I would like to know your thoughts. Yeah, our illustrious chairs and about this project. And if I keep the maintenance of the project, what do you expect me to do with it? If there are some rules or suggestions? Yeah, that's what I would like to know about. Yeah.
So I can chime in here. Paul and I have been discussing this a lot because it's very clear that people are still using kubefed. We see questions come up in Slack. I think the other thing that's very clear is there's been some activity, but the project has clearly slowed over the past couple of years. The idea of having someone come in and step up and maintain it is awesome. I guess we just want to make sure that we're very clear about the status of the product. If the project is still going to make a lot of forward moves, that's great. It is kind of it's probably a big commitment. I think the biggest thing for us is just making sure that the community is clear on the stance. Like, is this in maintenance mode? Is this, actively developing? Like, do we have enough people looking at it to, and I'm just asking questions right now. I don't have answers or a strong stance, but do we have enough people on it to address issues and give feedback, answer questions in Slack? I think, Paul, please chime in if you disagree or agree with anything I'm saying. But I think the big thing for us is just making sure that like people asking questions in Slack know that like, this is a good place to come get answers, or you may not get an answer. And so it's more like a maintenance mode project, and just so they can set expectations accordingly.
Yeah, I'm glad that I'm glad to know, Zach, that you're interested in maintaining it. I think Jeremy makes some good points. I will say that I'm thinking carefully about what my decision tree looks like here. And one thing that I'll mention is that I don't think it would be great for anybody if KubeFed wound up being sort of half alive with only one maintainer. I act what you say about wanting to enrich the project and that you've been using it, but I'm still trying to think about what my own decision tree is, and what the best thing for both the people that are using KubeFed now and the people that may want to maintain KubeFed is. I don't have a clear answer that I can give you right now, but I'm glad that you came and spoke to us today about it. Jeremy, I think you and I probably need to keep talking about this offline, so that we can be on the same page. It bears some consideration.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree to what Paul says. And actually, we lack of some contributors to this project. Yeah, and now if I trying to maintain the maintenance of the project, and I think that's currently mainly I and Irfan will keep the maintenance of this project, and we surely need more maintenance if we want to make it more active. Yeah, and I think maybe I could ask my coworkers to see if they would also like to help the maintenance of the KubeFed, so that we have more power to do this. Yeah, and another thing is that actually I think KubeFed its now state is maybe it doesn't need many contributor forces to keep that, because the issues and the PRs is not very rich like other active projects, and it's just keep a piece maintained state. Yeah, we have issues maybe 1 or 2 a week, and PRs maybe several months, and so so I don't think we need too much maintainers to keep the project. Yeah, I think maybe 2 or 3 would also okay to this project of this of current state. I think if we want like to make some big feature recently, yeah, then a small group of maintainers is also enough, I think. Yeah.
I think it might also be a little bit of a circular thing. So Paul and I probably need to discuss and figure out what the decision tree looks like, and we can follow up with you. But one concern is like, there aren't very many issues right now because the project's been very relatively stale. And so, it's people don't see a lot of activity. They don't, it steers people away. If it started picking up again and getting more contributions, I would expect that more issues would follow. So, active projects get more interest. It seems like a relatively safe assumption. So, like, I think if I look back at, some of the conversations we've had about this in the past, I think the big thing is that the status quo is probably not good for the project right now, because right now it's this confusing state where it doesn't get a lot of contributions, it doesn't get a lot of attention. So we probably either want to pick it up again or make a more formal stance about where it is. And, you know, the code's never going to go away. But I think what we're seeing right now is that KubeFed's kind of in a very confusing limbo, where it has some attention. It's clearly not like, you know, shelved, like people are using it, but it also doesn't have enough attention to really serve, you know, newcomers and some of the folks who are running into issues with it. So that's what we need to figure out. Paul, I don't know if you want to add anything, but yeah, maybe we should just follow up.
You know, I think, Jeremy, I think you put it well. Here's overall what I'll add is that it's pretty clear to me that like the state that KubeFed is in now is not one that should continue. And in the sense that it's sort of half alive, right? Like it's clearly not completely dead. It's still in our SIG YAML, right? But it's not receiving a lot of energy and attention. And I don't think that's good for us. It certainly muddies the water on what is SIG Multicluster doing. It certainly is confusing when you go and look at the repo to try to figure out what state the thing's in. And if I think about, it's in a state that like we're not comfortable with, we don't think is ideal, where do we want it to go, right? Like what states are ideal? And a state where it's a healthy project that has, you know, contributors from a number of different companies, et cetera, like healthy project state or archived, like it's clear that one of those is much easier to achieve than the other. So as Jeremy said, like nobody's at risk of losing access to the code. But if I think about the states where we can feel like there isn't something that needs attention on it, it's clear to me that like one of those is like we're at the bottom of the hill and we have to push it up, and the other we're at the top and we have to just give the boulder a nudge to get it rolling down, right? To achieve that equilibrium and get it to a state where it's not halfway. But I tell you what, Jeremy, I think you and I need to take an action item to like make our decision tree, and we probably need to put a date on it because, you know, KubeFed has been in this state for some time, and it's the presence of it being in this state is something that I'd like to put to bed in one way or another. Can we do that, Jeremy? How does that sound?
Yeah, how about by the next meeting?
Perfect. So that'll be July 26th, if I'm doing my math correctly.
That appears correct.
So what I understand is that you may get the decision at the next meeting, this project's future.
We're not talking about decision, we're talking about decision tree.
Okay.
So what's the threshold to take a particular action on it is what I think needs to come before a decision. And that's what we're talking about, Jeremy and I bringing to the next SIG meeting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, cool. Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Laura, you're up next.
Hi. I'm going to share my screen.
I'm shocked that you have visual aids.
I have a few visual aids. Okay, so I wanted to bring up something specific about the About API. This came up from a conversation I had with Tim Hawken, who is even in the call today. Hello. This is about the well-known cluster property idcates.io. And just to give a little bit of background and also remind everybody for the MCS API and for the cluster ID caps, which are related projects, that are both in alpha status right now. I'm tracking the beta blockers in this document here, which I've linked, including all the various histories too. So happy to give like any other more general update or refer to any of this, but the section that I'm specifically talking about right now is this item about idcase.io. And then one more just reminder intro thing, not intro, but like reminder thing, I guess, about what I'm even talking about is that in the cluster ID cap, there is this definition of a cluster property CRD, and there's this a very specific definition of a cluster property of the name id.case.io that has some certain restrictions written in the standard, and this, at least for the purposes of its partner KEP, the MCS API, the goal is to use the value of id.case.io in potentially various things, but right now DNS for multi-cluster services. So all that background is to say that I was talking to Tim. I'll make this, oops, that's not how I make it bigger. This is how I make it bigger. I was talking to Tim about this, and we were discussing from an API review perspective, is id.case.io too strict of a name for this cluster property? Should we go with something that's more like a variant and some, you know, I'll kind of just like mention all of these things here because this is what it boils down to. But even though this name is in cluster property, which itself is in the SIG multi-cluster sponsored CRD. The CRD does have this really sort of like general sounding API group name. If someone was just looking at like this, you know, this kubectl get cluster property id.case.io, like it kind of sounds like pretty, you know, serious. But it does have some specific restrictions on it from the KEP that are tied to our goals of using it in MCS. And potentially people will use it in cases that those restrictions do not align with or think it's bigger than it is. And it is possible that this about API could be used in the future for different types of ID. So like there could be other variants of ID that might be used for certain types of logs or might be used for some other project altogether that maybe would have some type of convention or naming too. And I just want to remind everybody that we did try to negotiate this CRD long ago to be in KK as the definition of a cluster ID to solve the perennial problem of why my cluster no have identification. But there was a lot of resistance to a one-size-fits-all approach, which is why we went into a CRD, why this was like a SIG-MC CRD in the first place. But now that all the naming and stuff has shaken out, just looking at it straight as it is, maybe this word is still a little too strong. So that's it as I understand it. Tim, feel free to jump in too if I missed anything, just because this conversation was mostly between you and I, but I wanted to get some perspectives from this, and it's particularly timely because folks have been coming up to me talking about wanting to use the CRD, and I want to make sure that they're using the right name. I'm gonna skip Jeremy to Tim because I asked him first.
Sorry. So yeah, for everybody else, this came as I was looking at things that are still alpha and what would we need to do to make them go beta. And even I had paged out the context of, sorry, my doorbell just rang. I paged out the context of it being specific to a cluster set. And I was trying to figure out how to use it without being in a cluster set and realized that I couldn't do that. And so it felt like maybe it wasn't most appropriate. I'll be right back. I'm gonna go check my door.
Okay. All right, Jeremy, you get to talk now.
How I wish that it could be me at Tim's door to be like, surprise.
Hi.
I think this makes a really good point. I don't think we want to scope it so narrow that it's MCS ID. That seems like
yeah, that word maybe is too much, but
yeah. Especially because we already have cluster set ID. That would make this ID somehow smaller than a cluster set ID because it's, you know,
right.
Because MCS relies on cluster set, it can't be bigger and it's just MCS. So like maybe it's the MC ID or something. It is a bummer that we can't make this, or that it seems like there's friction to making this the one, because Kubernetes is really missing that. In my opinion, this is like a big gap. But if we can't address it, at least saying like MC ID, maybe like in the multi-cluster context, this is the ID, so that we can at least say that all the multi-cluster stuff should use it. I think that is probably more reasonable, but you know, I really
think
wish
I think we can still win the day in the larger context, but we need to show that it's actually useful and valuable and that the schema works. And doing so in our own context seems like the safest thing to do it. We can define the id.k8s.io and say this is intrinsic to the cluster and it doesn't change through the life cycle of the cluster, and then, you know, boost it as something that people should use. We could use it in GKE, for example, right, as an existence proof, and take the risk on it ourselves. And I think if we can show like, actually it is useful and you can do cool things with it, then we have a stronger argument for bringing it into core, although at that point, maybe it's a sailed ship.
So, sorry, go ahead, Laura. I'll go after you.
I still agree there may be reasons why like having opening for variants might be relevant, but can you speak a little bit more to like what of the, you mentioned that like the restriction was that it needs to be part of a cluster set. And I think there is also something that maybe we should clarify in here too about this, about if it needs to actually be like, it has restrictions when it is within a cluster set, but then I think it's not very clear for this one. And then maybe we want to make it clear, especially if we separate out the variants, if a certain field can be filled only if a cluster is part of a cluster set. Did that make any sense?
It makes sense to me. Can I make sure that I understand the root issue? So here's my statement of what I believe the issue described is, which is that the name sounds more general than the actual semantics applied to it are, and those semantics are strongly correlated with cluster sets, right? I think it makes sense. Here's what I offer as you know, a way to soften or contextualize the name. What if it was like, and I know people won't like this, so you just know that before I say this next construction.
I'm ready.
And it's cluster set ID. Like that is my offer to provoke the right name being offered. But the point is to correlate with cluster set within the name, so that it's clearly linked with that concept. What do people think about that?
So we have cluster set ID. That's right. Or is it just cluster set?
We have cluster set.k8s.io.
So okay.
So this is like the identification of
that
the cluster set.
The value of the cluster set.
More like ID cluster set variant, you know, is like some sort of, this is like, ugly also, but like that's the pieces of information we're trying to combine.
Can it be a dot, like id.clusterset.k8s.io? Like, do we, I don't know if I forget if we set up rules for this, but like, it seems, you know, we do something similar when we govern label names within Google, right? We have a repo where people can claim names so they don't step on each other, and it's delegated this way. So you could say all of cluster set or all of MC, or, you know, pick a sort of label that is owned by this SIG, and we get to define names within that SIG.
Yeah, that could definitely work. That's
like, we also need like, I don't know,
um,
because like it's not the ID of the cluster set.
right.
And then if we get like, if it's the cluster set's ID, it's on this side, that's just too much. Things need to be on the right side of something, you know. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
Don't let me name things, but I'm suggesting a model, not a name.
Sure.
I think the model makes a lot of sense. Just looking back, like we wanted ID to be like immutable for the life of a cluster. There's just no way to do that. That was the problem. Like there's no way to bootstrap CRDs at cluster creation and make them immutable. So we couldn't make strong statements like that because they boil down to like, please respect this everywhere, and without giving a mechanism to make it doable, that seems difficult. And I think we could get away with some trust there if there was a way to bootstrap CRDs, but there's just no way to actually say like this cluster doesn't function until the ID is set. So there's no way for us to say you can rely on this ID being there, which means all implementations need to be able to handle changes even if they're not supposed to happen, because there will always be at least one change from no ID to un ID. And I think that gets really that gets messy. Yeah, Paul, you're right. Like everything is, please don't break this. But in this case, like there is no mechanism to give you like the ID is always set. Like we can't do that, right? Because CRDs can't be always set today.
No, but we can, it's fair to say, this is how we expect you to use it and how people who are consuming it expect it to operate. And if you violate that, then you get to keep both parts.
Right. Okay.
One other variation of this is all of this in this KEP is very like how this acts during a cluster set. There's potentially a version where we also provide information of how this acts when it's not part of a cluster set, and also when it like transitions in, if we think we can future proof that enough for this name, or for a variant that's less narrow than the ones we were just discussing. I don't know if that's the best idea, and it also overlaps a lot with where we got real stuck before, when we were like, let's put this in KK. So I'm kind of scared to open that up, but just want to mention that as a route too, that we address more on the side of what are the uniqueness, lifespan, and content restrictions when it is and isn't in a cluster set, instead of changing the name.
So we got to those restrictions because of the pain that we hit when we were trying to make this the universal ID, right? So I do agree that maybe we want to rename it to align with the restrictions we have now, instead of trying to solve the universal ID yet. I agree with the idea that maybe we talk about the universal ID and we just go ahead and implement it somewhere and take a bet on it and see if it gains traction. That might be an easier way to show that it's useful instead of having a theoretical conversation, because the cluster set side of things is not theoretical. Like we've got clear use cases, right. We know we need it. The global ID is definitely theoretical. I think everybody agrees it would probably be good, but there's tons of different ideas about what format it should take, and it seems like a lot to bite off right now.
Cool. Any other folks have feelings, comments, concerns? Have had nightmares of this, perhaps?
I hope that you won't have nightmares. I would say it's probably not worth nightmares, but I see someone else looks like they want to talk.
Yeah, Matthew, go for it. I saw the video come on.
Hi, I'm on the AWS team and actually working on a cluster ID implementation. So I was wondering if I can kind of ask a question along the same lines with the cluster ID. I just wanted to get your guys' opinion on who should create it. Should it be a customer? Should it be automated? And I kind of want to see what your stance is on that.
Yeah, so we've definitely, from the perspective of the standards, we've left it open. And also from the perspective of the standard, we kind of soft pushed Cube namespace UUID more so on the like really awesome as a cluster ID, or the best idea in Kubernetes to date of making a good permanent cluster ID. The there was lots of discussion at that time that like is super sucky for DNS because humans don't want to write UUIDs, and so we always knew that was kind of like not great for the real use case we were designing, like the narrow use case we were designing for, which was MCS's DNS. At least like in GKE, that's right now based on something that's user specified that ends up being usually very similar to what that user specified as their cluster's name. So then it's more human friendly. It's more what they're used to. That I don't know that that's an official stance of SIG-MC, but I think like that is the reality of where like the implementations have landed, that like it's trending towards something that is user specified because that provides the most value in DNS, and that's the use that it currently, that's the one most important use case that it currently has.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. If that was
Oh,
the
I can't
scenario.
hear you. Oh, sorry.
Hello.
Now I can.
Better. So
Yeah.
yeah, if it was the customer, let's say, that did do it, at what point do they define it? Is it like I guess before the, let's say, controller would start? And let's say, yeah. With that.
Yeah, so when the in our case, not specified anywhere by SIG-MC, I believe on purpose, is the idea of a cluster registry or something that like knows about all the clusters that are part of a cluster set. Also in the MCS API, it's very like there's an MCS controller that knows about everybody, and we're not describing exactly what it is. So in general, like in the Submariner case, in the GKE case, it's at registration of the cluster to the cluster set through whatever that implementation specific cluster registry is. That is when this value is set, that is then used later in DNS.
All right, cool, thank you.
Yeah. Cool, okay, so what I heard from all of this was we recognize and respect the issue of needing variations in ID, maybe forever, and definitely in the short term, because we already know it was too hard to make a universal ID from prior times. So we need to come up with some name that we don't hate, that isn't id.k8s.io, because that's too intense. And that maybe what I can put too in the KEP or somewhere is that we like reserve id.k8s.io for future use. I mean, we also like already have the privilege of anything that ends in k8s.io, but I can kind of move that explicitly, because I think, at least from this discussion, we believe here that if we give something the about.k8s.io/cluster property name id.k8s.io, people are going to interpret that as the unique, definitely this cluster name forever. And so we should prepare for that eventuality. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
I think you're also hearing a lack of any voice saying no, id.k8s.io is
the name,
and we should just keep that.
Right.
I noticed no one said anything like that. I think we're all trying to figure out what the right way to qualify the name to give people like a contextual cue that they need to understand the semantics, and they can't assume that it will be set once, constant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a good call out, because yeah, I'm not hearing that either.
Yeah, so I think the hard part now is coming up with a good name.
Same thing as always.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I can, I'm very good at making surveys, though this is probably trending on the most boring naming survey I've ever come to, because I feel like it's, I mean, maybe I'm just not very imaginative, but I feel like it's really got to be something really close to this, or, you know,
Yeah.
we don't have that much wiggle room.
I think boring is good because it's easy to understand. You know,
Right.
there's a big part of me, Laura, you know this, that still wishes we called it supercluster, but you know,
I know.
shit is still. But maybe I don't know, maybe we can just send out on the forum like a spreadsheet with some ideas, give people a week to add their ideas, and then we can send it a survey for the, you know, any, you know, the ones that seem most intuitive, something like that.
Yeah.
I imagine this one can go pretty quickly because I agree we have yet to see a single interesting suggestion, but you know, that's where crowdsourcing.
Right. And this is like, since the original problem was like interpreting it wrong from just what I can see in this with the smallest amount of context, it can't be something cute, you know, it needs to
Yeah.
be something you understand immediately from just this word. So we're really restricted here in how cute we can be.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
cool.
so maybe we do that and set a time box on suggestions.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, it
I
doesn't
think-
harsh my vibe at all to ask on the mailing list. And I know this one's a hard brainstorm because it's so specific, but I'm happy to take some more ideas and, you know, give people time to chew on it at least, or something, instead of just unilaterally decreeing here. So that's fine.
Cool. What should we time box? Oh, maybe a week on the spreadsheet so we can send it a survey.
Yeah. I think I'll send it right after this, and then we can do a week on the spreadsheet, a week on the survey, and then we can have this wrapped up by next meeting.
Wrapping it
Great.
up. That sounds awesome.
I know, doesn't it sound awesome? Wouldn't that be cool? But anyways, great. Thank you, everybody. As mentioned, there's also other details of other beta blockers in here. Happy to give an update anytime in this meeting or the DMs, or you can read this or anything. So just contact me.
Cool.
All right. That's our agenda, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Laura. See you on the forums and in a couple weeks.
All right. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.